Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Alex, and in this video, we're going to be talking about why Horizon Forbidden West Burning Shores is absolutely average. This is a brand new DLC for Horizon Forbidden West, a Sony exclusive by Guerrilla Games, which is only for the PS5, and that's definitely a big bummer for those of you who wanted it for last gen, and I doubt this will be the last AAA developer who does something like this. It's a trend that initially when the new consoles came out, I wanted to happen for performance sake and an easier dev cycle for those studios. But I do now understand that many people can't afford new hardware always, and I want games to be as accessible as possible to all people. So the game is about 6 to 10 hours long, depending on what type of player you are, which I do think is a fair price for a $20 DLC, especially for how much good there is, primarily in the depth of content to be played or replayed. However, there are some other issues with the gameplay and narrative that make me think that you should maybe hold off for a sale if it's something that you care about more. The reason I say this is because this is a AAA game, and some of the things that are really missing for me here I felt were overlooked, and it's a real bummer because I did want to like this. I went into this game expecting to really like it, and I kind of felt a little underwhelmed. So when the game initially launched last year, I was pretty stoked about it. I had never finished the first game, and I was ready to dive in with all of the upgraded mechanics for like Aloy. That being said, I did finish the base game of Forbidden West last year, and I found it to be pretty good. It had really good boss fights. The combat felt really good. It's absolutely beautiful. It ran pretty well. The story is lukewarm. It's not something I really cared about. And in fact, I didn't really even remember what the story was like going into this new DLC. Had to refresh myself. And luckily, Guerrilla Games does add little nuggets of information to remind you of exactly what is going on. And just like the original, the game runs amazing on the PS5. I had very little pop-in, which I remember was kind of an issue when the game launched in early 2022. I also played on performance mode, which I thought was going to make the graphics kind of look like crap to hit that 60 frames per second, but I gotta say, I'm very impressed. Everything you are seeing on screen right now is performance mode, and not only was the game locked at 60 the whole time, the graphics were super clean, and it appeared to be in 4K the entire playthrough. I'm sure there were dips in resolution, or maybe there was like an upscaling feature occurring, but I certainly couldn't tell, and it made the immersion of the world that much better when you could have fluid control of Aloy as well as those great graphics. But the control was not always so fluid, which we will touch on in just a moment. There was only one bug that I had the entire game, which was during a segment where you are in a cave with Seika, I think that's how you say her name, using the ballistas to shoot handholds to climb around the cave. Seika became stuck and was telling me where to shoot, and I didn't know where to shoot because she had bugged out. So a quick restart fixed it, and I had no issues for the remainder of the game. I would likely attribute this stability to the fact that this DLC was only available on the PS5. Something tells me that since they didn't have to waste a bunch of time developing the game for multiple pieces of hardware, the devs were really able to put their time and focus on just making this a fun, perfect game for the PS5, which I definitely can appreciate. So unfortunately, the gameplay is a little weird for me, and this is mainly why I think the game is simply average, as you see in the title. From what I remember, I loved the gameplay when I played the main campaign last year, and I'm not sure why. Things just feel so much different in terms of being able to control Aloy. The third-person camera was really bothering me during many boss fights and traversing through certain tight-quartered levels. Let's use Resident Evil 4 Remake, for example, since I've played that a lot, and I know a lot of other people have been playing it as well. I know it's not a one-to-one comparison here, but just bear with me as I go through this example. Leon is super responsive in that game, and if you, for example, are reloading and get attacked by an enemy, you'll be able to parry that enemy away, no questions asked. You can turn around on a dime. Leon is super sensitive and responsive at all times. Well, inside of Burning Shores, Aloy felt like she was stuck inside of syrup. She would not turn where I wanted her to, she would not move where I wanted her to, and her animations are quite slow when she gets knocked down by enemies, which is very frustrating because then they can just keep beating you down over and over and over again, and none of this was helped by the control scheme on the actual controller, which I was finding to be a bit unintuitive. I think a good example of what I'm talking about is when she is climbing. There were a few times I was fighting enemies and I would fall down a random hole in the middle of the arena, which is a complaint for another day. And I would climb back up and she would never just go where I wanted her to go. There was another instance where I was climbing through a broken down machine, and while you are climbing, there is fire and electricity in between holding points to damage you, kind of like a puzzle obstacle thing. But the controls were so bad that even when I wouldn't want to climb it, I would be forced to either jump onto the holding point where the damage was, or I wouldn't be able to move to get out of the way of danger, and I would just get hurt, even though I was actively trying to avoid it. And I know you're supposed to use a combination of the analog sticks and X to jump and then square to like back off of certain things, but it just wasn't responsive enough. And I think that was a very big problem for me, is that Aloy is a hard character control, which allows for some very tedious moments throughout the game. And I don't know, I was just very frustrated. So I'm going to show some spoilers here in a second. So if you want to skip ahead or just come back later, you are going to want to do that in just a second. But in the final boss, this was the worst offender of Aloy's lack of control. This boss is so big that you can't move the camera around appropriately to always see clearly. His targets are infinitesimally small, which is fine, I suppose, but I can't really see them, so that is where the issue lies. And since he has so many appendages and they're all constantly flailing around, it's hard to keep track of where certain things are incoming so that you can avoid damage, because you simply just can't see. And when Aloy gets knocked down, she stays on the ground for such a long time, and oftentimes you can't even see where she is, and you're just hoping that you don't get hit again and die. Not to mention, part of this boss fight, you have to run through little pools of water, which slow you down even more, and then you'll sometimes get stuck into swimming animations. It really just didn't feel thought out at all. And it was such a cool moment. I was very saddened by this whole experience. And there are other instances where you're walking around the level and the camera just will have a seizure and I'll just lose where I am. It's just very frustrating, because in these close quarters fights, I felt like I was fighting against the camera and the animations, which is not a good feeling. And combine all of this with the control system, which is a little funky in certain instances. And I say certain instances intentionally because there were moments where the combat worked really well. And we're going to touch on that in a second, because I really did love it. But when you are in a close quarters battle and you are trying to drink a potion or add more berries to your health stash, Aloy will stop in place, which I really don't think is appropriate. These enemies are pretty difficult and really fast, and they have like projectiles that shoot at you. And so anytime you stop, you're guaranteed to take damage, which means you're going to waste even more resources than you originally intended to. I'm also not really a fan of having to use the weapon wheel all the time. I really wish there was a quick swap feature so you could, pick between 2 to 4 of your favorite weapons, just like through the D-pad or something. I don't know. It really just interrupts combat when I'm kind of micromanaging the camera and controls and Aloy's movement as well. Now, if this wasn't an issue with the camera, I don't really find the weapon wheel to be that big of a problem, because, like I said, there are some issues that are so fluid that just you get lost in that combat. And those were the moments I really love, which, like I said, we're going to talk about in just a second. This could be a personal issue of mine. Maybe your experience will be different, but after playing so many games over the course of my life, I never really have complained about something like this before, and I wouldn't bring it up if I didn't think it was important. But like I said, it's not all bad. There are some good moments, as sometimes the combat all works really, really well. So let's talk about that. It's my belief that this game's combat is exceedingly awesome when the enemies are smaller, like, other people, or when the enemy types that are larger are in a wide open space. So when I don't have to micromanage that camera, combat feels so damn good. And most of the open world events where you'll like fight a random boss, or even some of the bosses in the actual campaign, for the most part, they all take place in open spaces. But the campaign seems to love pushing Aloy into these cramped, tiny, dark spaces, which is such a shame because it makes some of the most pivotal moments in the game just very unenjoyable. And I really don't mean to be negative about this, because the game is beautiful and it's really fun to play at times. This is definitely my main sticking point, though, when it comes to the Burning Shores. But this does bring me to my next point, the weapons and gadgets and all that good stuff. So for the most part, you will be sticking to your traditional bow and, slingshots, the typical Horizon fashion. And firstly, you should be able to get new legendary armor and a bow, I believe, for dirt cheap as part of the DLC, so that you can be at an appropriate power level. I did unfortunately lose this part of my footage, so I might be wrong on the specifics, but it is something like that. And throughout the game, it's easy enough to find Brimshine, which is a resource to purchase legendary weapons in the Burning Shores, and you can get a good amount of great upgrades throughout your playthrough. You'll also get a motorboat, and you'll be able to drive all around the area, as well as a water wing machine, which allows you to fly and then swim underwater with it, which is so fucking fun and is a really cool way to travel around the map. And it just makes you want to explore rather than fast travel everywhere, which, I'll still do from time to time, but being able to, take in all of the beauty that this game has to offer, being able to fly and swim under, it's just a great traversal system, and it's so worth it. And I'm really glad that Guerrilla spent a lot of time flushing that out, because it makes you want to use it. But the big prize of the game would have to be this gauntlet that you end up acquiring about halfway through. It's like a magic gun gauntlet thing that you steal from a kind of mini boss bodyguard thing, and it's pretty sweet. It has an ability that allows you to lock on targets and then fire at them without having to worry about aiming so much. And it's also great for close range engagements. It's super powerful, and you'll definitely clean up some bad dudes with this for sure. It is a good time. The systems in which you upgrade your gear and access all your stash, that's all the same. I really wouldn't go into this expecting anything revolutionary in terms of like UI changes or anything like that. Just new weapons, new map, and of course, new enemies. So speaking of enemies, like I said, there are some new mini bosses and new enemies, and this game is pretty hard, so they can be a challenge. The hippo and the frog were probably my favorites. I think there is a monkey one that is new, but there are so many enemies in this game that it's hard to keep track of them all, but there definitely are new ones, and they're pretty fun to get through. Like I said, the frog, holy shit, this thing is huge, and it will like hop on you and stomp your face. It's freaking hilarious. He also shoots poison out of his sides and will like soak you in poison element, which will cause damage, obviously. And he'll also fire these like mechanical eggs at you from cannons on his back that they hatch and attack you. It's pretty nuts. It's a really good, environmental event, whatever you want to call it. And this is just one of those moments where the combat, the level design, and all of the systems come into play and work really well. So I really wanted to see more of that. And unfortunately, just with some of the bosses that you get through in the campaign, I don't know, it doesn't really hit for me. It falls a little flat. All right, so here comes another negative point. And I don't mean to be negative, it's just how I feel. And this next point is not nearly as big of a deal to me as the combat and control issues, but I just didn't really fall in love with the story, as I felt it was a little boring and uninspired. So this story inside of the Burning Shores is a continuation of the main game's narrative and is setting you up for the next game's narrative. So it turns out that there was one more Far Zenith leader that we missed from the original campaign, and we have to head to LA, aka the Burning Shores, to destroy him. Landra is his name, and he is attempting to escape Earth and head to space, while everybody on Earth will be destroyed by the machine of all machines called Nemesis, which is what we were kind of trying to stop or understand and prevent in the future inside of the main campaign of Forbidden West. So while we are traveling over to the Burning Shores, we crash land and stumble into a woman named Seika, or Sika. I genuinely just don't know why I can't remember how to say her name. She is just like you. She has a focus. She can fight. You guys team up to help find her missing people, as well as to kill Landra. And while you two are uncovering secrets along the way, you figure out that your two goals are actually very intertwined. So to be honest, it's all very generic, almost in the way it's written rather than the story itself. Landra, the antagonist, he just turns out to have essentially brainwashed all these people into a mini cult to help him get into space, and he is just the most generic, smartass bad guy, and it's just not interesting at all. I felt like actually none of the characters had that much depth inside of this DLC. And then Aloy and Seika, they are just written very generically. They're always giving a monologue about hope and how to never give up. And it's just basic fodder that gets you from boss battle to boss battle as far as I'm concerned. But I suppose the main issue here for me lies between the lame story as a conduit to get you from boss to boss, but each battle feeling like a chore of having to manage that camera rather than just enjoy my time fighting and killing enemies. So I can get through bad combat with a good story, and I can get through a bad story with great gameplay, but this was just pretty average on both fronts, and I even found myself getting kind of angry when I couldn't control Aloy the way that she should have been controlled, which led to some very frustrating moments. All in all, I would say you should wait for this one to go on sale if you can. There are many good games out right now and only more to come. So if you want to play this, I recommend waiting as it's just okay.